Diaspora, published in 1997, is a hard science fiction novel by Egan, an Australian mathematician and allegedly a person. But until I get proof of that, I will refer to him as a human-shaped swarm of bees controlled by a dozen platypuses swimming in a tub filled with marmite. In the 30th century, most of humankind have abandoned their physical bodies and consist as consciousnesses on hard drives that function as cities. Cities that can simulate everything you could ever want, so that there really isn't a reason to ever leave. This itself isn't that unexpected, but what makes Diaspora significant is how it commits to this premise. It doesn't play with any twists about what's real and what's not, nor does it preach about any idea of how flesh and blood humans have experiences that are any more real because suffering and death are part of life. Instead, it creates a compelling argument that this is inevitable. This is what happens to every civilization, and there is your Fermi paradox solved. That is why the skies are quiet. It does it so well that now I have to put an asterisk to every story I ever read, where any civilization wishes to spread itself across multiple star systems. That was a pretty dense opening, but so is this book. Even the filler parts are dense, and there's a lot of filler. So let's go back to the beginning. The year is this. And humanity consists of three distinct groups. First, there are the flesh and blood humans. These people are called fleshers. They are only a tiny minority. Atlanta has about 12,000 residents, and I don't remember if any other major settlement was ever mentioned. Then there are the Gleichner robots, human minds that have been transferred into robot bodies. They tend to live in space and no one cares about them. Most of humanity consists of citizens among polices. Those are the hard drive cities I mentioned earlier. Polices are physically tiny. You could hold one on your hand and throw it towards someone who doesn't like you, and afterwards that person still wouldn't like you. Polices are located deep inside the Earth's crust. Copies of the data are kept around the solar system, so they are pretty much indestructible. In the beginning of policies, humans scanned their brains and copied their minds to these computers. This process is referred as the introduce. Now policies create their own citizens. These citizens start from templates of real people, but can be the offspring of one people or a dozen. Policies create virtual realities for their citizens, and they don't really have limitations. You can look like anything and do anything. Well, except hurt others. This makes finding visuals to this somewhat challenging. Like, think of that world in Ready Player One. A reality where no one got a single idea in a century, and everyone just wants to be with Batman and do whatever is popular. Well, this is nothing like that. Like, I choose to present myself as the entire cast of Frasier, but as a ball where all of them are raccoons, and I might change that every 20 seconds. So what do you want to do when there are no limitations? Well, depends on the polis. We begin this novel in a math polis, because that's where the author himself would want to live. Then there is Ashton Laval, the artsy polis, if that's your thing. The anti-Miyazaki Tarantino polis, where you always wear clown shoes, and everyone is melting during an orgy polis, and frogs going to war and screaming polis. I might have made those last ones up. I got carried away during a math section. So back to the math polis. After a citizen is born, through orphanogenesis, you should just go read that in Craig Egan's homepage.
Best birth.
They are soon discussing non-Euclidean geometry in more spatial dimensions than 3. As a reader, you will have very limited tools of visualizing all this. Think of 3 blue, 1 brown videos.
The checkerboard pattern on the surface of the sphere is accurately reflected in the projected view that you see with Felix.
Now try to convince yourself that this would work better as a podcast.
And the pink dot represents where the point that started at the North Pole ends up after the rotation.
This doesn't really improve the experience. Now you know what I meant when I said that even the filler parts are dense. It may sound like cheating to say that you don't have to understand the math to get something from this novel, but you really don't. It's just thematically fitting that this novel has a lot of math in it. Understanding it is completely optional. You'll see later why that is. Large part of this novel, I'm just trying to comprehend that all behavioral models, bodily functions, social norms, are all merely ideas that are, well, optional. And everyone recognizes that. About everything. Nothing is certain except death and taxes, right? The beauty of the physical world had nothing to do with its power to harm. That was just a dogma of the dead statics in another guise, and everything to do with the simplicity and consistency of its laws. That's one way to describe death as something non-mandatory. Here's another when a citizen comes across a corpse of a recently deceased flesher. This charred skull was not a symbol in some jaded work of police art. It was proof of involuntary erasure of a living mind. That's some lengthy way of saying, "He's dead, Jim." You are likely beginning to see why this novel isn't often quoted in our daily lives. That other half of death and taxes is pretty obvious, right? There is no government that would do anything with the money you don't make. So what do you do if you get bored of math police? Well, you can do small tweaks to your mind so you will get more kicks out of spending time in that orgy police, you sicko. You can even install a religious belief system that overrides everything else. But you can also just remove everything. Begin as a blank slate. Take the soul vessel to the old hags and reallocate your levels from intelligent mage to a big bonk strength build. Then you can consider visiting a polis where there are other games than Dark Souls 2. Inoshiro has made this choice, destroying this old self and creating a new one to follow the ancient meme's dictates. Every choice is thought out and often considered to being a dogma that remains in you purely because you got it from a specific polis. Any attempt from me to define a free will in this novel is a whole flesher corpse of worms, so let's keep away from that for now.
I know Kung Fu.
That's a choice.
Maybe you have read Life Cycle of Software Objects. People in the world of Diaspora don't even pretend to be anything more than those premium Pokemon that you want to fight. Experiencing time is very different from ours. If 10 years pass outside, you can experience 8,000 years inside a polis. Or you can just wait and not go through all those centuries. If you want to, for example, see a comet passing the Earth 200 years from now. By the beginning of the novel, the coalition of polises has existed for over 741 subjective millennia, during 910 years of leisure time, of which about 98.3% has occurred since the last major coalition-wide police hardware upgrade in UT 2750. That was straight from Wikipedia. If it was mentioned somewhere during the novel, I missed it.
My God! 1,000,000 years!
Here might be a good moment to ask, is anything like this realistic? Well, not what can be done in the year 3000. Policies are centuries old and their function is pretty well optimized. But what about the first steps towards this during our lifetimes? Greg Egan did ponder this in his previous novel Permutation City. There we see how this sort of introduce might happen, slowly, and even in a world driven by capitalism. There, brains of dying people were scanned and moved into a simulated world that worked only as much as those people could afford. Only the direction you look at would render, and if you can't pay for the best computation, well, your reality would only run at, let's say, at 1/20th of the speed of the physical world. When enough people join your cast, You then have friends that experience this simulated world with that speed with you. So you'd spend a year in your pit of slow time, and 20 years passes outside, which is great, since the best thing you can do now is to wait for this technology to improve. If society and the power system doesn't collapse, wait long enough and the time stretching balances out and the castes will disappear. From now on, future improvements will make the virtual world work increasingly faster than our physical one outside. This idea has been recognized by many storytellers since its inception, so much so that if I'd want to talk about the legacy of the ending of Permutation City, I'd have to make a full video essay just about that. Meanwhile, in world, a while back a brain of a fly was scanned. Replicating a complete human brain isn't that out there. So can you live forever? No. Can a crazy rich person live forever? Also no. We are talking about making a copy of your mind. Even if your copy gets to live in eternal bliss, you're still outside busy being dead. This isn't a ship of Theseus question. It's that Star Trek transporter beam question. Does it kill you and just make a new one? If you said no, what about if you arrive to your destination a second before the other disappears? Yeah, sorry, still very dead. Let's get back to the year whatever the hell, because things do also happen in this novel. 2 neutron stars collide and a gamma ray burst hits Earth. When this looming disaster is detected, police citizens try to warn the Fleshers about the unavoidable end of Earth's biosphere. Some of them listen and go through the introdust themselves to join the policies. But some Fleshers die due to a language barrier. Flesh and blood humans have evolved into avian, amphibian, and dream ape lineages. These differ so much from the purest, unchanging statics that communication requires bridgers, in-betweeners that translate between these different human subspecies with differing amounts of disdain towards the digital polis citizens. Years pass and there are no humans left outside of polises. This isn't seen as much of a tragedy as you might think. Fleshers die. That's the one thing they do, right? The age of flesh was over. The neutron star collision is still a mystery, though. This was a binary system, close enough to Earth to be well documented and understood. They were orbiting each other far enough that a collision was supposed to be 7 million years away. So what happened? To suddenly change neutron star orbits like this requires just stupendous amount of energy. So where did this energy come from? This isn't something that can be studied inside policies. So to find out, you need to actually leave Earth. Space travel hasn't really been on anyone's minds in a while, because the policies have everything anyone would ever want. This includes science and exploration. Usually everything can just be simulated at home. Gleichner robots have traveled to different star systems, but this is only mocked in the policies. Copies of policies are sent to interesting star systems. They are really small, remember? There aren't really limits of how many copies you can make of a city or a citizen. This happens after a brief discussion about whether it would be better to just spend 500 years perfecting functional wormholes. Here is where the actual diaspora part of Diaspora begins. Citizens have ideas or opinions of how space travel should feel, so some stay awake during some or all of the voyage. So I have to ask, should space travel be defined as like something that existed before you abandoned your bodies? If space travel as we'd think of it only existed like, let's say 200 years, and your age is measured in hundreds of thousands of subjective years, is there a point of calling this ancient way more true? This is the point where time jumps between chapters begin to leave our mortal timescapes behind. We join a polis that wakes up about a millennia after the previous chapter ended. This is really easy to miss within this pile of, again, whatever the hell of a date. So here's an important quote. I've crossed 27 light years in an instant. I'm orbiting a first planet ever found to hold alien life, and I sacrificed nothing, left nothing I truly value behind. This is too good. This first contact is something you can also find in a short story. It's called Wang's Carpets. I'm not spoiling it during the next 5 seconds. I'll just remind you that humanity has been shrinking into itself and losing all interest for the outside universe. Is Earth an outlier? Will we come across a sprawling civilization that builds things throughout its solar system and travels to others? The planet is called Orpheus. So maybe you'll now know what this place has evolved into. Okay, I'll spoil it now. They find no one. It's one computer. At first read I thought it's a single-shelled organism that skipped all other evolutionary steps and became a simulation creating a Turing machine, but no, it's not even that. It's a sugar, a carbohydrate that weighs 25,000 tons, but doesn't have an actual shell in it. But it's still a computer that makes simulated realities to these squids. Other civilizations are found throughout the Milky Way, 6,000 in fact, but we only concentrate to the ones that embraced solipsism and shut themselves from the universe, just like humans did. Somewhere around the year 4000, suicides begin to increase on Earth. This is mentioned in passing. We listen to one character contemplating about this Earth self dying. One of my 1,000 clones that I never met is gone. Should I feel something? Communication with aliens isn't as hard as humans speaking to humans. You can communicate with everyone with math. Math is universal. No need for lengthy interpretation processes that you need if you want to talk with human that happens to have a few extra faces. See, this is why buttload of math was thematically necessary. One planet seems to be more interesting than the others. Its atmosphere has been altered 1 billion years ago to sustain life. From neutron spins, a message is deciphered from the planet's atmosphere. These transmuters, as they are called from now on, managed to foresee every major incident that would happen in the galaxy long before they occurred. The neutron star collision Lacerta G1 that hit Earth was also foretold by the transmuters. Unlike the civilizations that never went anywhere, these transmuters are interesting enough to actually chase. One alien species that's discovered are kind of a mold that live within their unchanging shells, and they actually tell humans that, yeah, transmuters went that way, now go away, we are busy doing nothing, and point to a universe with more space dimensions. A way to travel to these other universes is discovered. This happens around the year 5000. So now Paolo and Yatima, these are the name of the characters we've been following all this time in Carter Zimmerman Palace, might as well mention it now. Paolo and Yatima go through universe to universe in pursuit of the transmuters for about 90 billion years. Everywhere they went, transmuters left something, just to say that Vdrutsk was here. I just smashed my keyboard. I doubt the transmuters were Polish. After about quadrillion dimensions, the trail goes cold and no transmuters anywhere. Because they were done. They had done the thing. You know, think of a thing. Yeah, they did that too. They had done all things. Then they erased themselves. And disappeared, like a fart into Goethe's void. Paolo decides to do the same thing. He's seen enough. It won't be death. The transmuters didn't die. They played out every possibility within themselves. And I believe I've done the same back in U Double Star. Or maybe I'm still doing it somewhere. But I found what I came to find here. There's nothing more for me. That's not death. It's completion. So Goethe's void is one metaphorical fart closer to being full. Just like Earthlings have been doing since around the year 4000. This is the faith of every civilization that advances far enough. That is the main argument of Diaspora. The time when traveling between stars becomes easy enough to do is also when post-scarcity civilizations no longer bother to leave their homes. Here is your solution to Fermi paradox. This is why skies are silent. advanced alien civilizations have a short expiration date in a cosmic scale, even when they can do everything they want, which is both frightening and beautiful. When thinking about far future post-humans, we have a bad habit of anthropomorphizing them as if we could guess what they want. But Greg Egan does pull this off. He has written many stories about immortal beings searching for meaning in life after millennia of living. One question I think he asked himself over and over while writing Diaspora is this: if something didn't exist, would you invent it? Policies have no limitations, like we would define them, so they have gone through this question, not just with government and traditions, but with bodily functions, free will, constant flow of time. Asking this enough times, you can begin to move the species imperative from what we have to want to what we want to want, which is what we choose to want. That only sounds stupid, but it really isn't. Trust me, I'm a bear wearing a chicken hat. Really, I'm asking, what will your goal be after all suffering is removed? One thing that had to remain or get reinvented is actually tribalism. That's like the one thing that drove Diaspora to research anything. Carter Zimmerman Police has citizens who take pride in making sure that it's their science-loving police and not the frog police that finds the first alien life. Humans still sometimes follow the ancient memes dictates. If there wasn't a home team to root for, maybe everyone would just stay home and ponder if Dark Souls 2 still had something to offer after you've beaten it with fists. There are no longer actual stakes, except the ones we choose to treat as such. This is why Diaspora is the final story you can tell. By the time you reach First Contact, you have already reached the end of history. Good day, sir. Remember Gleichners, robots with human minds I mentioned in the beginning? They have been in space since this story started. Millennia later, there's a rumor that Gleichners are dragging a white dwarf star somewhere. Could Gleichners be the one to climb the Kardashev scale? Well, I doubt that idea lasts that long. No reason to expect them to build a blame-like Dyson sphere. It seems that they are rather searching for that true species imperative. Unlike with policies, that can't just be math, right? That would make having bodies pointless. Building such megastructures seems to only be a thing when you have rogue AIs and von Neumann replicators, and those aren't really a thing here.
Remember me!
I really began writing this as a tangent for a xeelee sequence essay. It's a bit silly. This story made humans conquer every universe and speedrun through all achievements in every life, while the xeelee sequence still sits in the corner eating glue. Tone of this essay would fluctuate wildly. When everything is great forever, it's not useful to make comparisons to a story where 100 billion dead child soldiers are a rounding error. Here's a passage from when fleshers are being warned about the neutron star collision. Someone asks if this gamma ray burst could be used as a weapon. Yatima tried to imagine an alien species with retarded morality required for warfare and technological prowess to manipulate neutron stars. It was a deeply unpleasant notion, but about as likely as influenza virus inventing the H-bomb. Remember that in xeelee sequence humans made a neutron star into a bullet to be shot towards the xeelee ring. Implied concept of shots fired. What you gonna do, interim coalition of governance of the xeelee sequence? Blow up trillion more kids and continue to be at war for million more years? Yeah, sounds about right. Still, it doesn't seem to be that rare to go from xeelee sequence to this.
Why doesn't mine look like that?
About that gamma ray burst that ended the age of flesh on Earth. The energy that changed the orbits of the neutron stars came from infinite number of adjacent universes. All that and still policies didn't suffer at all. This emphasizes how flesh might be fragile, but data doesn't have to be. If you have any further questions, you can go to Greg Egan's homepage. It will answer none of your questions, it's just more math. Then you can read Night Picnic from Terminal Boredom by Itsumi Suzuki to balance your brain. It's sort of the opposite of this. Should I keep going? I could keep listing things you can't relate to. I didn't even write a single joke about Severance.
At great risk and harm to the Egan name.
A reminder, 1997. That's how old this book is. Simulated realities weren't really mainstream back then. If you knew who the Wachowskis were, it's because you liked Bound. 97 seems to also be the last year Greg Egan updated the UI of his homepage. Even then he saw that we would communicate with emojis. That's what I think when gestalts are mentioned. That doesn't mean that this novel is just ahead of its time. It's timeless. One thing that becomes unavoidable after reading Diaspora is that you want to tell everyone about Diaspora. More than anyone will want to listen. It's really not an elevator pitch that's easy to sell during 10-second summary. That's why I made this video, so I can cope with this obsession that was born from listening through this opening so many times before realizing that the physical copy has a glossary at the end. It might be a lost cause fallacy, but I can at least now tell you all that audiobook really isn't the recommended way. Instead of keeping on going, it's thematically more fitting that, like civilizations that disappear from an outside observer, this video too will suddenly just